Hi, I'm Weston Productions, and today I'm breaking down a remake I did of We Stayed Up All Night by Conrad. When I first heard the song, I really loved its production and its sound design, and wanted to remake it so I could figure out how it was done. And today I'm going to share with you what I did. I figured we would start out with a bang, with the drop section, and then maybe in a future video I could go over the verse sections and the intro and outro. So here's the drop section. So first thing that we can look at here is the drums. So we'll just solo all the drums. And in producing EDM, I found that it's often best to run the kick separately from the rest of the drums. Some people swear by busting the kick with the rest of the drums so that then you can clip and compress together. I personally just try and leave my kicks alone, but your mileage may vary. So first starting out here with the drums, they're pretty simple. So pretty basic, like down-tempo kick pattern with kicks on the first beat of each bar and then an offbeat there, which is all pretty standard. And one thing to notice here is that all these samples have a similar feel to them. They all feel kind of old school, a little bit nostalgic. And we notice that with the kick and the snare, and then also the hats here, it's a little bit closer to like an old school like Lynn drum machine sound. And there's nothing super special about the processing, but one detail to note is that we've got a much shorter hi-hat playing for the rest of each bar, but the first beat is an open hi-hat to add a bit of an accent to it. And then off the drums, we have a sidechain from the kick and the snare to the rest of the synths. I've personally found that when I have a really loud snare, sidechaining it will help the snare really cut through a lot more and help me get closer to having like as loud of a master as possible. Then let's move on to the synths here. Now, the big secret I found is that I believe that Conrad bussed all of the synths together through different phases of distortion. And the reason that'll be different from distorting the synths individually is you get what are called intermodulation harmonics when two signals, in this case two synths, are distorted together like in a nonlinear system. And that's a bit beyond the scope of this video, but in short, it creates separate harmonics that arise from the interference of all the different frequencies together, and it gives it a much crunchier, fuller, more interesting sound than if we distorted them separately. So just starting off with the bass here, we'll see that we are in the key of B, and this is a 4-1-5 chord progression. So starting on E, then B, then F sharp. Let's solo just the bass to hear that. And then on the synths, we have something very similar, just a very open voicing, so having the root very low in the bass, then having a third a couple octaves above. And then together, those chords sound like this. Now let's start getting into the patches and the sound design here. First thing you might notice, there's that kind of like sweepy frequency shift sound. And I know that Conrad is a big fan of frequency shifters. I hear them on a lot of his other work, so I figured that he was adding those in here to give kind of the downward swoop effect on that you get on the first beat of every couple bars in the original track. So basically I've just got a frequency shifter on here, and using the fine tune on there, just have the automation sweeping down on the first beat of every two bars. and that creates a cool, slightly dissonant sweep down because the frequency shifter disrupts the relationships between all the frequencies in the signal. So it gives kind of a different sound than just using pitch bend. But just for now, so we can hear more closely what it's doing, we'll just turn that off. Then let's start out with this bass synth here. And I'm going to go up into this group and just turn off all this processing for now. So we're just here in this patch. Whoops, didn't get these. All right. So this is pretty much dead simple. It's just a square wave and filtering off a bit of the high end with this auto filter here, just because it was sounding a little bit too harsh, especially when it was distorting together with the other synths. So this patch is really pretty simple, and you can see that in addition to the frequency shifter, we've got a slight pitch bend down. And I'm using the square wave there because, number one, I think it helps contribute to the slightly nostalgic like chiptune sound, and square waves, they also have the property of having the most energy in the wave compared to any other waveform. So to get like the loudest, fattest bass possible, I'd often recommend using a square wave. And then again, pretty simple patches here. It's a bit of processing. Let's just turn that off for now. So listening to this patch. So same as in the bass, we've got those pitch bend sweeps coming down. Then one thing to notice is that we actually using the MPE here to create pitch bends on each note. And that's a nice feature that Serum has that a lot of other synths don't have. So this lets us pitch bend each note individually instead of just using the one pitch bend control. And you can access that in Ableton by going to the MPE tab here in the MIDI clip editor. And then when you click on a note, then we're able to see that individual note's pitch bend. So we're kind of using that to bend this last chord up from F sharp major into G sharp minor, which helps kind of complete the chord progression and then give it some momentum as it comes back into the E major. So then listen for this chord to sweep up. And it creates a more fine-tuned sound than just using the regular MIDI CC pitch bend. And as far as this patch, it's again pretty simple. I tried layering both a saw and a square to give it a slightly thicker sound. It sounded like it was kind of missing something with just the square waves, and the denser harmonics of the saw wave, I think, kind of helped out. But notice that I've got the saw wave tucked back a little bit more on the level compared to the square wave. That's because we want for this sound to be predominantly square waves for that kind of like chiptune-y sound. And then for the processing that these are all going through. Oh, and then really quick, just turn these back on. Got a bit of an EQ. We want to roll off the low end just a little bit so it's not conflicting too much with this bass. And then using the OTT to smooth out the frequency balance a little bit. So it's not really doing a whole lot, and then just taking down the width just a little bit. Because with that unison, the way that the unison is set up by default, it can get quite wide, and it can be very easy for that unison to be overwhelming and too wide. So we're just pulling that back a little bit. Then as far as the processing on these, this is where it gets really fun. So first we've got the EQ. We're just ducking down some of these lower mid frequencies. I guess that's pretty much low frequencies. Then bringing up some of these warmer mids and also bumping up those lows. In this EQ before all this distortion, that'll matter a lot because the frequency balance of a sound before it gets distorted is going to have a very big influence on the harmonics that the distortion creates. So we're not just trying to change the frequency balance of the sound through this. We're trying to change how it sounds through the distortion. Then we have the shifter, which we talked about earlier. And then the magic really starts when we turn on Camel Crusher here. This is a favorite distortion of mine. I believe there are several Ableton racks that do what it does pretty similarly, but this is just such a convenient, like, one-stop solution for that. So let's listen to the before and after. So that's slamming that pretty aggressively, just creating a lot of really warm, thick, rich harmonics. And then after that, we're getting the kind of wobbly sound on them with this volume LFO and Shaperbox. And then we're bringing out some of the high end with Fresh Air, which is a free high frequency EQ by, I believe, Slate Digital. So it's just helping bring out some more of those really glittery, sparkly harmonics that are coming out of the Camel Crusher. Now let's move on to this lead synth here. Now dialing this in was a massive pain in the ass. I'm still not confident that I've got it exactly right, but it's pretty close. Let's start by just turning off all the processing and then seeing how it comes together from the ground up. So with all the processing off, then let's turn off the distortion on the synth bus just so that we're getting the pure sound of the patch. So it's basically starting just as a saw wave, and I've turned up the pulse width modulation on this a little bit because the PWM, it creates a different tone. It also reduces the volume of the fundamental or the lowest frequency in the sound a little bit. And that can be a more elegant solution for thinning out a patch. It can be a little bit more elegant than just using a high-pass filter, because as the note that you play moves around, the high-pass filter will affect it differently. So you can hear without the PWM. So you can hear as we turn it up, it gets a little bit thinner, a little bit more nasally. But I thought it was best just pulled back about this much. And then I've got the amplitude envelope just smoothed out a little bit. It's got a bit of an attack and then a bit of release just so it's not too choppy. I found that when you put a really choppy patch through distortion, the distortion can really bring out a lot of those like choppy, clicky sounds. So I think it works best smoothed out, and the distortion will compress this so much that we won't really notice this fade in too much, but it will give the sound a slightly smoother contour overall. And then going on to the post-processing, adding in a little bit of vibrato right here. Oops, that was everything. And that vibrato or that pitch wobble helps contribute to the kind of retro, nostalgic sound of the lead. Then next I've got a ring mod here. What this does is it creates kind of dissonant harmonics above and below the frequency of the sound, and it just helps give a slightly dirtier, gritty sound to it, especially as it goes through the distortion. So we'll hear the effect of this even more later as it gets distorted. Then we have a high-pass filter here. And the goal of this is to thin it out just a little bit, but we also get a slightly different tone by boosting these lower frequencies with the resonance. And then I've got a little rack here that I use a lot called NEI. It's basically a gentle saturation that just slightly boosts a wave without really distorting it too much. And I've got another video going over that on my channel with a free download if you want to check it out. And then without it. And I've got some OTT on it too, and I turned off the processing on the low band just because there aren't any low frequencies in here, so all that it'll be doing is just aggressively boosting low frequencies that aren't really there, so it'll just be bringing out low frequency artifacts. So just got the low band turned off, and I'm just doing the processing on the mids and the highs. And that helps brighten up the sound a little bit and control that mid-range a little bit. And I've got the amount set to about 30% because I don't want to totally slam it, but I do want to kind of subtly shape it. Then doing some EQ to help change the tone. Then the magic really starts to happen with this distortion here. I've got it set to the half rectifier. And the reason that I'm doing that is because if you just use like traditional clipping to try and really fatten up a sound, you're just going to push it closer and closer to being a square wave, which in this case isn't exactly the timbre that we want, but using the half rectify distortion shape, that creates even harmonics in the sound, but without cutting out the fundamental. And that just gets us closer to the type of grit and bite that we want on this. And I've got the dry wet pulled back about 40%, just so we're not slamming it too much. And you can hear that that's where we're getting most of the buzz and the bite in the sound. And then, like with the chords, we're pulling back the width a little bit just because that unison can be a little bit too wide. Gives it some more focus. And then I've got a saturator here on the hard curve setting, which is really aggressive and really powerfully slams it. And this is pretty much the final stage of the distortion for it. And that's what really gives the sound its bite. But you'll see that the actual magic in the sound happens between this saturation and this rectified distortion, but we still did a lot of processing before it to kind of get the signal ready to be slammed this much. And a way that you can use that concept in your own sound design is you can get a sound set up with the type of distortion and processing you want. And then if it's still not quite there, then I would always recommend going further back in your chain to try and see how you can influence it. Because you'll find that the processing that you do before distortion will have an absolutely massive effect on how it sounds after the distortion. And then we've got auto filter just slightly taming the high frequencies while boosting a little bit around the cutoff. Then got the EQ, just pulling all those low frequency, pulling all the low frequency artifacts out. You'd pretty much have the same effect to use a high pass filter, but I've found that you can often get a little bit too much phase shift with a high pass filter, whereas a pretty gentle low shelf can do the trick anyway. And then it's boosting the highs just a little bit. And then next we have just a bit of hard clipping on it. And what this is doing is it's kind of helping to restore the crest factor of the wave. So all this clipping is basically really fattening up the wave. But then with the filter and the EQ, then we're doing some phase shift, which is going to disrupt the phase relationships of the different frequencies. So then we'll get the wave peaking a little bit higher than it did before. And we're just trying to restore, and then so basically all those peaks that we're unintentionally creating, we're just clipping back with this hard clipping. Then we've got some very small short reverb for a bit of that spatial effect. And then finally, then it's all getting bussed together with the rest of those synths. We've got the OTT set to about 20%. We're boosting the high end using just a splash more of that rectify distortion for some more dirt. And it's not a huge effect, but it's one a little bit more of those even harmonics created by the half rectify. Then you've got another round of Camel Crusher. This one's doing not quite as much, but I think it's important to have at least one final stage of distortion on your bus to really have everything glue together. And that's making a pretty massive difference, so I love that. And then finally just got the side chains. And that's about everything for the drop section of the tune. Just taking just one more look at the arrangement, you'll see that the lead goes an octave up in the second half of the drop for some more movement and contrast. Now let's really quick just compare back and forth the original and my remake. Alright, well thank you for watching, and if you'd like to see me go over other sections of this track, just let me know, and I'll be happy to do that. Peace out.